Welcome back to the Morning Show. Mike Barnicle, Gideon Litchfield, and Katty Kay are still with us and joining the conversation. Former McCain senior campaign strategist and MSNBC political analyst Steve Schmidt. John McCain, he's not really back on this issue, is he? He's always said this.
He's always said this. And look, John McCain was instrumental in the change of policy going back to 2005, 2006, when the Army Field Manual was updated and we had a conversation in this country what was appropriate with regard to interrogation of these combatants in an unprecedented new type of war.
What do you think? What do you think of the report that came out yesterday?
I think it's appalling.
Why is that?
This is not a 9/11 commission style report. This is a partisan report by the majority, released on a political calendar with no first-hand accounts from CIA officers in the field. It will endanger the lives of Americans abroad. It will make the job of the CIA more difficult, and this is why it was condemned this morning by Senator Bob Kerrey, Medal of Honor recipient, Democrat, member of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, and someone who served on the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah, but John McCain didn't seem to be very critical of what the report said.
He was not critical of what the report said, and I think that we're confusing two issues here. What was said in the report versus the actions that were undertaken. Deeply embedded in the tradition of the United States military, going back to General Washington's general order, number one is that British forces were to be given quarter, were not to be executed when British forces were committing all manner of atrocities during the Revolution. So Senator McCain has great moral authority on this issue, but when we look at the testimony of former CIA directors, the notion that these interrogations did not lead to actionable intelligence is not true. It is not the case. It is not the case on the testimony of many of the leaders of the CIA over a period of time. Now, should the United States, which is a signatory to anti-torture conventions, waterboard has always met the conventional definition, understanding, and under American treaty obligations as being torture. We should not torture. We should not waterboard. Every time a democratic society goes to war, as we move past that period of conflict, we're still in what I think will be a long twilight struggle, but we have always had to have a conversation in a democracy about the balance between our civil liberties and our securities. The internment of the Japanese, the suspension of habeas corpus. Proportionally, the excesses that have occurred by historical standards in this conflict are less than have occurred in other conflicts. So I think it's healthy to have the conversation, but we should not confuse this as a report of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It's a report by the majority staff.
Right.
And it is a singular failure of the leadership of Dianne Feinstein as chairman of that committee to be able to put together a consensus document that accomplishes what you just suggested we should have.
Well, I mean, how are you going to have a consensus document if you don't want to even talk to the CIA directors, if you don't want to talk to the people that ran the program, if you don't want to talk to people who were involved in the program? I've been saying it sometimes. It's just like writing a story about the UVA rape case and not wanting to talk to the accused. And in this case, the accused aren't frat boys. The accused are the very people that Nancy Pelosi and Jay Rockefeller and the Democrats on the Intel Committee said, go get them, guys, in 2002.
Right.
And so suddenly they are the they're the bad guys when 2002, 2003, 2004 nobody said anything. I said it yesterday. Dianne Feinstein, who's so shocked now, first time she got a briefing on this. She completely blew past the briefing and then asked about Yashchenko's poisoning.
These decisions were made in a time when there is a smoking pile of rubble laying on top of 3,000 dead Americans in lower Manhattan. And to go back now, 14 years later, with none of that context, second-guessing these decisions, ascribing bad motives to the brave men and women who have been on the front lines, working in the shadows, keeping this country safe. When we look at the effectiveness of these programs, and again, I believe absolutely it's important to step back, to review, to look at actions taken in the name of the American people. Are they consistent with our values, our highest ideals, as we always have? But to go after the men and women of this agency who have kept this country safe, I think it's appalling.
So just to be clear,
you think it's torture. With, you know, the activities described in the report, we're calling it a report, you do think it's torture?
I think some of the activities described in the report meet the definition of torture. Waterboarding to me is not an ambiguous is not ambiguous about it. It is absolutely meets the definition of torture according to the conventions that this country is a signatory to. Absolutely.
I think also, if you, I mean, you call it appalling, the burning pile of rubble. I understand the context that we can't even fathom at this point. You just can't. I mean, even many who covered it. But I don't think the question as to whether it's consistent with our values is the only question. I think in terms of effectiveness, it's not just did you extract information and how much compared to how you got information in other ways, because I think those are fair questions, but also does it contribute to an endless cycle of hatred? And that ultimately, in the long run, doesn't.
No,
isn't in the national interest.
It doesn't. Us waterboarding 3 terrorists in 2002 and 2003 doesn't. I will tell you what does contribute to an endless cycle of hatred, and what does create new terrorists every day.
Drone strikes.
When drone bombs are dropped on entire families, and you're willing to kill 15, 16 innocent people to kill the one bad guy, because you don't want to do what we did with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, which is do a lot of really good hard intel work, find out what neighborhood he's in Karachi, go in, grab him, pull him out, save everybody that he's living with, take him to a black site, interrogate him, get information that actually saves thousands of American lives down the road. So that's actually just, let's go ahead and just kill them all. And if we kill 5-year-old girls and we kill 85-year-old grandmas, so be it. We feel better about ourselves because that seems cleaner. That's what liberals are saying today. Yeah, no, that's what they're saying. That's what Joe Biden's been saying. That's what Barack Obama's been saying. The drone program went into overdrive on January 21st, 2009. And when you talk about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the information comes out about this drone program, Mike Barnicle, and people actually report on this drone program, it's going to look a hell of a lot worse, a hell of a lot deadlier, a hell of a lot more random, and a hell of a lot more inhumane than waterboarding 3 prisoners in 2002 and 2003.
Well, that point gets to something that Steve referenced.
Mark my words.
Our lack of ability in this country. We talk about having a national discussion on race, which we go back and forth on.
Nobody wants to have one of those.
But we have never really had a national discussion on the concept of our national security. If you think about it, we have been in one state of war, capital W or small w, for 75 years. Since December 7th, 1941. World War II becomes the Cold War becomes Korea, Korea becomes Vietnam, Vietnam becomes an endless spat of Cold War, the Iranian hostage crisis, and now we're in an endless twilight war. So for 75 years, the security state has been assembled around us.
You know what the Americans say? Keep my kids safe.
Right.
Like I sit here, I'm worried about drones, Caddy K. The American people aren't worried about drone strikes. Might be worried about what the NSA is doing. The American people, for the most part, the overwhelming majority aren't. I'm in the minority on a lot of these cases. You start talking about waterboarding, you know what? A couple of beheadings later, the American people go, yeah, all right, well, let's not do that again, but what can you do? There is no evidence that throughout American history that the American people writ large have been wringing their hands. They are Jacksonians. They don't want to go to war, but when you go to war, you do whatever it takes to win.
Yeah, and we saw after 9/11, there was a clear decision in this country that they were prepared to trade issues like privacy, issues like torture, issues like drone strikes in order to protect their own security. In fact, what's interesting is that since 2007, the number of Americans who are opposed to torture has been declining. The number of Americans who say that actually torture is valuable and reasonable in certain cases has been increasing. And that's as we get further away from the attacks of 9/11. I still think there does need to be a national discussion, and this report is the most comprehensive report we've had so far that lays out the case that American interrogators use torture. Now, you can mess around with the legalese of the language. But as Steve said, there is really no case to be made that waterboarding, shackling somebody and hanging them from a ceiling is not torture by most people's definition. And you have to have an argument about that. You have to have a discussion. Is that what we want to do as a country? Is that not what we want to do as a country? And as John McCain said, it's not really about whether the means justified the ends. It's whether we want to use those means at all, period.
I think the one thing getting out of this report that you do see that is helpful is how we weren't ready for this. David Ignatius said it yesterday. We were not ready. And in 2002 and early 2003, there were a lot of mistakes that were made, terrible mistakes that were made. I would stack those mistakes up with the mistakes that were made in World War II and say they were an asterisk. The good war, the firebombing of Dresden that killed hundreds of thousands of women and children in Germany after the war was already over. The internment of Japanese Americans. I mean, I could go down the list. The good war. This is a very, very small asterisk. And you know what? If we're wringing our hands and sweating and crying about this and having people coming on this show saying, we're no better than Al-Qaeda, well, then you just aren't grown up enough to run this place. We made mistakes, and we have to fix those mistakes, and it was abhorrent, and it is sickening, but we need to fix it and move on.
Well, the question I have, which goes back to what Mike said, is what does it look like to have a national discussion about national security? I mean, if you compare it with the discussion about race, you know, any national discussion here and as anywhere else is a national shouting match. But with race, there are people who are citizens of the country who have a stake in the outcome. And that leads to a process where people can lobby, put pressure, you know, exercise their will, their rights, their votes, whatever. So a shouting match about race can actually turn into policy. But a shouting match about did we torture too many people? Were we too harsh?
There's not going to be that shouting match. It's a three-word conversation that the American people say in poll after poll after poll. Some of them that I look at the polls and go, oh my God, we're a little too tough. Keep us safe.
Because
everything goes back to keep us safe. Why did George W. Bush, after stumbling for 4 years, beat John Kerry in 2004? Keep us safe.
And that's my point. The people
keep us safe.
The people who are being harmed.
There will be no discussion.
The people who are being harmed by these policies don't have a say because they're outside of the country. So that's why this kind of national discussion is difficult.
To your point, though, Joe, sometime in the next 5 years, it's almost inevitable that's going to happen, is Americans are going to be sitting down, watching their TV news or watching it on their phones or wherever they're watching. They're going to be told about the day that I picked up my cousin outside the capital of Yemen to drive him to the bakery. And he had a package under his arm, and he had been associated with a known terrorist, and someone at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada is sitting there with a guy standing over his shoulder, and they're looking at him on the screen, and they say, signature strike, whack him. And I get killed and leave a family of 7. He gets killed.
Well,
we're going to find out about these things.
Well, yeah, exactly.
The discussion
by the way,
that should then
happened.
happen. The discussion that should then happen is that affecting American national security? As you said, the anger, the hatred that's generated. But then how do you?
That's what I said at the beginning of this conversation. It's what I've been saying for a very long time. That impacts it. You have politicians in Washington D.C. and I will say, mainly in the Democratic Party, that believe you can have a clean terrorist war. And you can sit in Washington, D.C. with a kill list where the president says, we'll kill him and kill him and kill him, which they then excitedly leaked to the New York Times to show that this is a president who's powerful and in touch. And the president has his kill list. And then they just press a button from the United States, and then they go out to Arby's and have a bite to eat, and then they come back, press another button.
That raises as many questions as torture.
No, it doesn't.
But
it actually raises a lot.
From the torture
it actually raises more. No, this is how it impacts it. The drone strikes that have been going into overdrive since January 20th, 2009 actually generate a hell of a lot more terrorists over the next generation and a hell of a lot more problems for the United States of America than do 3 incidents of waterboarding in 2002 and 2003. And yet the same people that are creating a new generation of terrorists are wringing their hands, but not firing John Brennan, because in the end they understand why this was necessary.
They need it all.
The drone strikes are tailored for the culture of this country today, with fewer than 1% serving in the American military. It's an antiseptic
You're doing
war.
it from an iPhone.
Your kid can go to Brown University instead of the Marine Corps. Don't worry about your son, because we got a button.
God, Gideon, thank you so much for being on today. Steve, stay with us if you can. Still ahead this morning, Congressman Elijah Cummings, Senator Dick Durbin, Cosmos, Joanna Coles, and fashion designer DVF, Diane von Furstenberg, all join us. Also ahead.
What do you think she'll think of my
I think she's going to have some choice words for both of us.
She'll like the T-shirt.
I think she'll like the T-shirt.
Can you get
Maybe I'll just wear the T-shirt.
the food off of
I'll be
it
like
before she
Anderson
comes
Cooper
in?
on assignment, except I'll be here.
Also ahead at
I'll look
midnight
good in my white T-shirt.
this morning, Detroit officially emerged out of bankruptcy. What the city's
great.
now former emergency manager, Kevin Orr, says still concerns him about the city's future. He joins us next.